We're recording this on Thursday the 11th in advance of Joy Baker Day, because we want to have a little chat about some plans that are afoot to look at ways of helping home educators who find themselves up against a legal challenge. We know of stories like Joy Baker and other families that have had a lot of difficulty with their local authorities and have had to go to court. In more recent times, we know that things like legal aid are not really available to people, and it's much harder. And choosing to fight in court and to pay for a lawyer if you need one, it can be extremely costly. And with things going the way they are, with some of the local authorities, with some of the challenges we know families are facing, we know that we need to be prepared. And we're going to talk a little bit tonight about what's happened in the UK, what's happened in England in respect of some of the struggles we've had to face in the past, how we've dealt with them, and how we're thinking we can prepare for the future and deal with issues, you know, where people are challenged by the local authority or you know, having some sort of battle. Because one of the things that we know is that for a family, an ordinary family who have to take on their local authority, not only is there financial outlay, there's also a lot of stress and anxiety and a lot of challenge. You know, the very thing you want to do, which is to spend time with your family and home educate, is marred by the fact that you have to spend so much time and energy and finance fighting for your right to home educate. We're going to do some introductions. So I'm Juliet English. I'm a home educator of 23, who's home educating 23 years, 7 children, and just doing all sorts of things to try and support home educators in the UK. Who wants to go next? Alison.
Hello, I'm Alison Sauer. I was a home educator for about 20 years. My youngest opted to go to school when she reached high school age and went to a selected grammar school. I'm chair of the Centre for Personalised Education, which supports all alternatives to mainstream education and encourages debate and research in those areas. And I've been involved in the fight to support home education for a very long time. My history spans nearly the whole of the last 20 years supporting home education, particularly the last major attack on home education, which was what we call the Badman era.
Okay, Lil.
Hi, I'm Lil. I'm currently trustee of Schoolhouse, which is the home educating charity for Scotland. But I'm here tonight because I spent most of my early years home educating down south, mainly in London and near there. So I've been home educating for 16 years now and was very much involved in Badman, but also, as you'll hear, battles with the Tri-Borough.
Okay, Rachel.
Hi, I'm Rachel. I home educate 2 children. The oldest one is 13. They've never been to school, and I never know how long I should say I've home educated. I'm also an admin for the Portsmouth group, and I'm heavily involved in the judicial review. And I'm here to talk about that.
And Anne.
Hello, my name's Anne. I'm now in my late 30s and I've never been to school. So I grew up in Norfolk and I'm very passionate about home education and ensuring that that option is available to all families in the future. And I was never known to my local authority, so I hope that other families are also enabled to enjoy a peaceful existence without lots of harassment. I'm also an admin for quite a lot of support groups, and I'm a trustee for the Centre for Personalised Education, and I'm also involved in setting up the home education law project that we're going to be talking about in a bit.
Great, thanks so much. So we've found that home educators have repeatedly had politicians wanting to meddle and interfere with home educators, even though the law states that the parents are responsible for the child's education, either in school or otherwise. We constantly have politicians coming and wanting to to gain more control really over this community. So I'm going to ask Lil to talk a little bit more about some of the challenges we faced in the, from in the past and up till today. And Alison, if you want to chip in now and again, that'd be great. I'm going to hand over to you too.
Hi. I first got involved with the politics of home ed back in about 2006. So the important thing about this was it was under a Labour government, and we had the whole bad man era came under a Labour government. Now we have problems and it's under a Conservative government. So if anybody's out there thinking it'll be fine when we change the government, this has been an ongoing problem. It's been quite a slippery slope the entire time I've been involved. Also, people tend to say, oh, it's not a problem for me because my LA is great. They're not a problem. Well, I was in Westminster. Westminster was a fantastic local authority. I could turn up to stakeholder meetings and they didn't ask me where I lived. They didn't ask me how many children I had. In fact, they were very happy to engage with me, and they knew that they had no particular need to find out anything about me. That said, that all went pear-shaped the minute Westminster ceased to exist and became part of the Triborough, and we had a completely different regime once it was taken over by the lady from Hammersmith and Fulham. So it's not to do with where you live, because where you live might change. It's not to do with party politics. Party politics have changed and the problems have still got worse. With Badman, they tried to change the law and they failed. It would be nice to say that was because of all the effort the home educators put in, but actually it was because it was coming to the end of the Parliament and we managed to get it thrown out in the wash-up. But ever since then, they've been trying to find other ways of controlling home educators and doing it by the back door. And a lot of what we found, certainly under the Triborough, was the use of school attendance orders as a threat and a way of harassing people, bullying people into submission.
And it's got worse actually, Lil, because they have started not only using school attendance orders, they've also started using social services proceedings and seeing any kind of what they perceive as inadequate home education, which may well not be inadequate home education in the law, by the way, because home education can look completely different from school. And if you have a bunch of schooled people coming in and looking at your home education who have no knowledge of other models, then they will make judgments based on their experience, and they will make an incorrect judgment because they don't recognise the validity of your approach, which is particularly a problem because you can only really judge the success of home education by the adult that is produced at the end. So it can be very difficult. I can see that they can see that would be very difficult. But there's also been an increase in the undermining of parents, the undermining of the primacy of the parent. So successive governments have introduced more and more and more oversight of families. Now, they've not managed it with social services, so we don't have social workers coming around and checking in our cupboards that we've got the right food for our children. But we do have the equivalent in the education department where they are over-involving themselves in families' lives, the families who are home educating. And rather than assuming innocence and compliance with the law, which is the very basis of all our legislation, rather than assuming that innocence and compliance, they are now monitoring and inspecting and going beyond the reaches of that law in order to investigate things where they should only be intervening if they already have cause to believe there are issues.
Yeah, that's an important point. And there is an issue with the fact that we're a minority group and the staff are not trained adequately, or there's mission creep because they assume education is going to look like school, or they assume that they're in charge because teachers are in charge in school. And there is a complete lack of understanding of why it is so important that families, parents are in charge of the education, which is a human right, and not the state, because that makes us a totalitarian regime. So we're talking high stakes here. I was just going to give a couple of examples of things that have happened in the past that I've been involved with, and also things that made it to the press. So you might be able to look it up and see. We had one family in the Tri-Borough who were home educating, were very confident that they were providing a good education, ended up being taken to court. They made the mistake of assuming that the magistrate would understand the law, but the magistrate took everything that the local authority said as being gospel. And so they ended up with a large fine for not attending school. That was the point at which they appealed. And that's when it got quite dangerous for the rest of us, because once you're going into higher courts, you can have case law which can create precedents. And we were in the very bizarre situation where the family involved, the Sotelo, if you want to look it up, they needed to have a barrister. So that cost a lot of money. Weirdly, I ended up with a barrister on the phone because he didn't understand quite that area of law. So we had to brief the brief. But in the end, the court case was thrown out, which is great, but it's a lot of stress for the family. They had the fine hanging over them. They had to pay for the barrister, and the rest of us were paranoid that we were going to get some bad case law as a result. The other quite famous case that happened not too many years ago now was the Star of Matilda ending up with a school attendance order. This was a classic case of the local authority deciding that you had to jump through their hoops regardless of whether they were based on the law. The child had been seen by goodness knows how many people, because obviously she'd been starring in a West End show. And it wasn't until after they'd given the license, had all the months of rehearsals, all the months of performances, it was after all of that they came back to the parents and said, we don't think your education is suitable. And then there was months and months of more stress, trying to persuade them, parents meeting, but they wouldn't take it because it was from the parents. Parents apparently are not trustworthy people. And so they wanted to see the child, or they wanted a third party report. Neither of those they have any grounds for claiming they needed, but it got as far as a school attendance order. The family said, great, we'll see you in court. And then they backed down completely and it was never taken to court. That family did complain. They took it all the way through to the ombudsman. And at every stage of the complaint, they were told that all they could judge was whether the local authority had followed their policy and not whether their policy was legal. So there's this whole kind of impetus that families, if they really want to fight it, you're going to end up in court. And we tried fighting the Tri-Borough every other way. We'd got the chair of the select committee involved. He'd written 3 times. He'd written to the person, the professional who's in charge of the department. He'd written to the person in charge of the council. He'd got the education minister to write. All of this had been going on. All of the politics, people had contacted councillors, they'd contacted the MPs, nothing changed. And so the only recourse that we have is really going through the courts.
And I think the whole thing is that, you know, most parents want to be able to just get on with home educating their children, but as things stand right now, with there's so much I suppose, grey area a little bit in how local authorities can interpret. So things are, we're finding that because parents are not being trusted and not actually being given an equal voice many times or believed in the same way, and that's causing an imbalance really. And I think one of the big cases we've seen recently is in Portsmouth, of course, where you've got a local authority basically who is handing out school attendance orders like candy, and except it's not as enjoyable. obviously. But and I'm going to ask Rachel to talk a little bit about that, because that's been incredibly stressful for them as a home educating community. So Rachel, please tell us a little bit about the impact of this on your lives, and you know, what you had to do to be able to take the local authority to judicial review.
So Portsmouth have been doing what Lil described, and using school attendance orders as a way to intimidate families into compliance with their idea of how we should behave. Mostly they use it when they want samples of work, or sometimes for other reasons. We never know, because they never explain the reasons. but they do seem to use them as a kind of a tool to achieve compliance, and it's not about actually getting better education for anyone. And when they started doing that, we did all of the things that you're supposed to do. So we had meetings with them. We tried to talk to the people in the EHE department, and they didn't want to meet with us as a group. So we started talking to the local politicians, and then we were having meetings with the managers. Those went on for a year until they blew up. And then we started using the internal complaint process. And to our astonishment, even though we had like really well-written complaints, the EHE team got backed up at every level. And so the next stage was either fold or organize as a community and go to judicial review, because we already knew that the ombudsman would not look at the legality of the policy. So that's what we did, and it took, and it still takes, an incredible amount of work. We started those meetings with Portsmouth City Council in 2019, beginning of 2019. We've had dozens of people involved in the in all of the things around the meetings with them, then the judicial review, then fundraising. We had to set up a company on the fly. We had to make sure we have a bank account, because we were fundraising these huge sums of money for a judicial review. Judicial review is extremely expensive. And so we needed to have it get somewhere. All of these things were things that we were learning as we were doing them. We're all just home educating parents. And we have an amazing community, and people really pulled through. But I think by now, and it's now the end of 2021, 3 years later, and we're all severely burnt out. And if I can do anything to help the next community to do a little less, maybe not have to raise the money themselves, not have to set up that company, not have to manage the money and find the solicitors and find the barristers and do everything from the ground up as things are happening under tight deadlines, that would be really, really helpful. Because no matter what happens with our judicial review, there will be a next case. There will be something else.
There will, and on that point, what we have to understand is that way back when, in Joy Baker's day, she was on her own, very much like this judicial review. She was groundbreaking. She was going to the highest courts in the land, etc., etc. And then we had more of a reprieve, and there've been some bumps along the road, and we've had some bits of case law, for example, the Harrison case and the Talmadora case, which defined what a suitable education is a term within Section 7 of the 1996 Education Act, which is the one that allows us, if you will, to home educate, the one that says that education is the job of the parents, not the state, and that we can delegate it to a school, or we can do something else. And so we've had lots of different little bumps along the way, but it's got a lot more serious again. And this is the point, is that it's not backing down. In the past, we had friends in Parliament. We had a friend in the chair of the Education Committee of the House of Commons, which is quite a powerful position if used well. we had the ability to write to government, departments. We also had much better guidance that was published by the government for local authorities. And the problem that we have now is that they introduced new guidance, which is quite frankly pretty appalling, and makes even greyer the areas that were potentially grey before. We had a way that the law was set before, we had an interpretation of the law, we had a way forward, we had a government department that was willing to stick to those rules, that was willing to stick to that regime, and now we don't have that. We don't have that at all. We have them yet again trying to change the law, only this time, unlike in the Badman days where it was very upfront about changing the law, this time they're going about it in a very sneaky way. And they're trying to change the law through changing practice and through changing little bits of legislation.
Changing definition. They're also changing the definition.
Changing definition. Well, that is, there was a report by the Local Government Association where they redefined the term children missing education. And they said that any child missing a full-time and formal education was a child missing education, which of course exploded the figures that they claimed were missing in education. And what we have to remember is a huge number now of the home, not like when I started, not like when Anne was home educated. Most of the home educators have just come at it as a natural extension of parenting and just continued on being parents to toddlers, parents to young children, parents to tweens. You know, it was just a continuation. Now, the majority of home educators are people who've been let down by the state.
So we know that legal action taken against parents, or even where you've got a local authority that is actually kind of hostile to home educators in the area, that creates stress for families. It's not an ideal, mutually respectful, trusting relationship, respectful relationship that is missing. And so sometimes people will find that they have to actually take legal action. But in the past, we've not ever had, people have had to battle it on their own. And it's the Portsmouth cases that made us realize, look, we really need to come together as a community and support one another, because whatever happens in one local authority can impact the entire country. And the home educating community came together in the most wonderful way, and Portsmouth raised a huge amount of money within a very short time, mainly just from the home educating community coming out to support them and help cover their legal costs. But it's given rise to some conversations of how we can think ahead and get ahead of this kind of thing. And so I'm going to hand over to Anne, and she's going to talk a little bit about some of the things that have been discussed, what's been happening, and what our plan is.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's sombering, isn't it, to kind of really reflect on all the things that have led us here. But also I hope that what we're doing with Joy Baker Day and all of this is sort of reflecting on the history that we've had, but also remembering and being thankful for the people who've gone before us, and then thinking about what we're doing now in order to keep this wonderful option of home education available to not just for us, but to every single family in this country, because you never know when it might be the right fit for you and your child. So we've been having discussions, a lot of us here have multiple hats, and so we've been having discussions for over a year about the idea of building a legal fund. And so this would be something that we had ready to go, so that unlike what happened to the families in Portsmouth, where they're dealing with the trauma, I'll say it, the trauma and the stress of being harassed by a local authority, or even if they think the local authority thinks it's acting reasonably, still, if you're going through a court case, that's not the most stress-free time. And just having some money ready to go. So that wouldn't stop anybody from the local group fundraising for themselves in addition, but it would just take some of the stress off if we could have a pot of money that was there ready to go. And it might also mean that some things didn't get as far as needing a big judicial review, because occasionally if you go to a local authority or a department with a very official letter of legal opinion from a barrister, then that can calm things down. But obviously, because barristers have got years of training, those letters don't come cheap. So what we've been doing, and this has been a collection of people representing different parts of the UK, because we all know that what happens to the law in one part of the UK can very quickly turn into a law change across the 4 countries, is been working together to think about how we can get a fund together. And so things are moving on. They're at quite an early stage in some ways, but we've also done quite a lot of work in others. So the plan is, if you imagine a 3-stage plan, of which stage 3 may never happen, and I'll explain why. So stage 1 would be that we got a fund together that meant that we had a pot of money ready to go. So if an individual home educator or a group of home educators came and said, hey, you know, things have got really bad in whichever county, and we think we need to take our authority to judicial review, there'd be something there ready. Or if the Department for Education or whoever comes out with some new guidance or is trying to change the law and we think there's a procedural thing, that a group of home educators could take that. And this would be a fund for cases of national importance. So that's quite important. It wouldn't be a fund to say, oh, I'm going to the magistrate's court and I need some help from a solicitor. It would be if you got to a place where there'd be case law. So that would be an appeal at the Crown Court, or you were going to judicial review, or anything like that, where what happened, the outcome of what happened, could affect home education across the board. And obviously we want to make sure that we protect all kinds of home education, but particularly the kind of autonomous style, because if we focus on that, everything else follows. So if you follow a school at home style and autonomous education is protected, then you will be fine. Whereas at the moment, there's a real move in government to make home education like homeschooling and only a school at home style. So stage number 1 would be that we had a fund ready to go. People could pop in whatever they could afford into it. And then if a group needed £5,000 for a letter for a barrister, or £50,000 to take a judicial review, there would be a group of people with a diverse range of home educating backgrounds to have a look at that and to say, yes, we've got some of the money, we can help you. So that's kind of the broad idea for phase 1, and that's the thing that's the most important and immediate thing. Phase number 2 is looking at legal education around home education law, because we can prevent some of these bad things happening if local authority officials, for example, actually know the law, because most of the time they're operating ultra vires, they're operating outside the law. So we need to start doing things like having training courses for local authority officials and for social workers, which used to happen in times past, but we need to bring those back in again and make sure that those courses are led by people from the home educating community with relevant experience. We also need to start training up more barristers and solicitors in this area of the law, so that if we do need to take a case, we've got lots of people who already understand, because that can also reduce the legal fees, because they're not having to go off and do all the research, because they already know, oh, section 7, I need that, or whatever. So that would be phase 2. And then phase 3 is the phase that might never happen, but we should aim for one day. So let's say that this has all gone very well and we've, everyone in the community has donated so much money that we've got millions of pounds and we don't know what to do with it. Wouldn't that be lovely? At that point, stage 3 would come in, which would be being able to give grants to people for their individual legal fees. So if they were going to the magistrate's court and needed help from a solicitor or something like that. And the reason I kind of labour that point is just to make sure we're really clear that the focus at the moment is cases of national importance. So a group of us have been working together, and because these things are a bit of a faff to organise and do all the paperwork on, there's a very small number of us who've been listed, but we have formed well, it's technically a company, but it's not a business. It's a not-for-profit company called Home Education Law Project, which is HELP for short, as we like the acronym. And the idea of that is very soon. So that's just been incorporated so that we can have a legal entity that exists. And we've applied for the bank account, and that's been the thing that's holding everything else up. But once that exists, we can then start gathering more people around and adding more people onto the team. And we've already got some volunteers, but we'd really love some more volunteers. So if you would like to be involved in fundraising for a legal fund to help home education. If you've got, particularly if you're a solicitor or a barrister or a paralegal, or you've got legal expertise, we'd really value some time. We need some people who are willing to donate some pro bono skills. If you've sort of failed to mention in any of your dealings with any of us that you know, your part-time hobby is fundraising and you kind of know loads of millionaires, please let us know. And we need everybody to get involved. And this is sort of at an early stage. We want to keep informing everyone about what's going on and making sure that we get lots of people involved so that we have a really diverse group of people looking at this. But just to say, the initial kind of starter for edging out a legal fund is coming, and now's the time to just get as many people involved as we possibly can. And yeah, we're just in that in-between stage, aren't we, Juliet, where it's kind of like we're sort of there, but we haven't got the big website and things yet because we're waiting for the dull legal stuff to go through. Anyway.
Yeah, and I think the thing is that as a home educating community, we need to become a little bit more cohesive and working together and pulling together, because as I said, if one loses or if one community loses, it can impact all of us. And you know, so we do actually want more people involved, and for people to actually see this as a positive thing, and that everyone gets involved, gets behind it, you know, looks at ways in which you can contribute if you're able. You know, we have so many home educators in this country that if literally every family gave £1 a month to a fund, we would be well away. It wouldn't take long at all.
We've sort of done this. If you're looking at maybe 2 judicial reviews in a year, then that's £100,000, you know. So and this would, and just to sort of reassure people, you know, this isn't anybody trying to speak on behalf of the community. No, anybody who tells you they can speak on behalf of the home educating community is, I don't know what they're on, right? You can't.
They're delusional. They're delusional.
They don't understand the community if they think there's only one.
No.
But you know, nobody here, you know, this is all being voluntary run at the moment. This isn't, these sort of figures are because legal cases are expensive. You know, this isn't us kind of all trying to take on paid work or anything. This is just us going, let's get a pot together, because then we can be on the front foot next time.
We're trying to get ahead of it. Yes. And we're trying to take the stress out of it. We're trying to give families a sense of knowing somebody's got their back, you know, and not having to be quite so fearful, because I think the stress is a huge factor. If you just think how much time all of so many home educators have had to focus the last 2-3 years just on completing consultations and trying to make people aware and signing petitions and getting petitions going and all of that, because there's been so much focus on home education recently. So very, very important that that we all just become really aware and help where we can. So I think if there's, we will have opportunity for questions. If you want to put questions in the comments and when this video is playing, then you can. There will be people who can pick up on that. And Anne, is anything people can do right now to show their interest or to get involved?
Yes, so I will give you an email address that you can send to. If you can just sort of get in touch and say, it's just a sort of a temporary holding one until we get our proper website up. But if you can get in touch and say, yes, I'd love to get involved, or, you know, hey, you know, I'd love to give you money, or I'm a lawyer and I want to give you some time. Anything like that would be amazing. So and if anyone's got any questions, you know, we're all around as well. So please just ask away, because this is very much about having the communities back, as you say.
Yes, and we are just trying to explain this really quickly. So please, if you've got questions, I would also suggest that you ask people that are actually involved. We're more than happy to answer any questions you have. So thank you very much, everybody, for your time. And we're going to end that right there.